Reviewing games at launch has certain difficulties in the modern landscape. Stalker 2 has received 3 patches since it released last month. I started the game as soon as I finished the mammoth 144 gig download the day after launch, and by the time I wound down my first playthrough, the second patch had released. The game I played is already dead, gutted, and restuffed with nearly identical filling, yet subtly changed. As the years go by, who knows how much of the original will remain. But I'm not a prophet, so this review is devoted to the game I actually played, for better, for worse, and for the balance that existed at launch. I only completed Stalker 2 a single time. I played on veteran difficulty. It took around 90 hours, and I followed the S.T.A.L.K.E.R questline to the finale. I didn't go after all the achievements, though that's something I'll probably pursue down the line. Stalker 2 was an experience that left me conflicted. On the one hand, it's pure strain Stalker, the prior trilogy distilled down to its most base parts. Scavenging, surviving, exploring a ruined and surreal atmosphere, but expanded, blossoming beautifully into a massive open-world sandbox. But on the other hand, it's pure strain Stalker. Bugs, poorly thought-through conceits, and the gradual deterioration of the game throughout the runtime, exacerbated a bit by the relatively long time to complete. There's a parallel to this game, beginning and end, pros and cons. To discuss what I like and dislike is to lay the game out chronologically. The beginning of Stalker 2 is very, very strong. At times, the experience overshadowed even the original. We play as a man named Skiff, a former soldier who is drawn back into the zone after an artifact strikes and destroys his home. We actually start slightly outside the zone and have to sneak our way across the border, encountering all the big threats, anomalies, emissions, and a bloodsucker right off the bat. It's the closest thing the series has ever had to a tutorial, and it seems incredibly useful to newcomers. There's some obvious, massive improvements. The graphics and sound are leagues above. And the number of small immersive animations in this game are really staggering. Weapons jam, our character stuffs his face with sausage to heal. We can play the guitar if we want, all sorts of stuff. Once we get ourselves to a town, the game opens up in full, a sprawling map with hubs dotted fairly unevenly and hundreds of scavenging opportunities. We start out with typical shitty gear, old hunting rifles, AKs that jam on full auto, and unhelpful armor. There's a few interesting twists to this game over the prior ones. For one, the cost to repair and modify gear is very high, with even minor repairs to guns often costing the full value of a few artifacts. I know there's already some mods to change this, and I think they've even patched it down officially at this point. But personally, I liked the decision, especially for the veteran difficulty. It gave the game that raggedy scavenger feel that Shadows of Chernobyl had. I'd find my enemy's least broken guns after each firefight, turning them into my main weapon until they were too degraded to fire or I ran out of ammo. Ammo weight is back in a big way in this game, so careful preparation and scavenging on the go is key to surviving any excursion into the zone. Although I must admit, this kind of game brings out my most unhinged pack rat traits. I spent half my playtime waddling around, encumbered by dozens of nearly not broken guns that I wanted to resell in town. The one aspect of the economy that I concede as seemingly poorly balanced is artifacts. They rarely sell for as much as a pristine gun, which you'll realize pretty quickly and will drastically affect the way you approach scavenging runs. I kinda wish I could just trade artifacts directly for item repair or something like that. The other big twist to the economic side is armor suits. If you carefully explore the locations you visit, this game will keep you flush with new threads. I didn't find the need to upgrade any of my early suits because for the first 20 hours or so, it seemed like I stumbled on new gear every hour. Scavenging with intention is hugely rewarded. It seems like every new location you visit will have either an artifact hunting spot or a secret stash tucked away beneath the floor, or really anything. There's a lot of that loose platforming here, and I got really into it. Hours flew by. I dreamed of this game the first few nights I played it. It was a truly enrapturing experience. The enemy balancing most resembles Shadows of Chernobyl. Humans are dangerous, but mutants are immediately terrifying. They've been retooled as bullet sponges, and each mutant has wildly different behavior and abilities that make the fights exciting. They basically fulfill the role of mini-bosses, except they tend to spawn randomly in the world as you explore, and honestly, I was getting mixed signals about how to handle them. The fact they absorb so many shots and drop no loot is tattletaling that they should be avoided, and we should cut and run when we see them. But on the other hand, I had a bloodsucker track me for nearly 10 minutes as I sprinted across the map. It's a bit of conflicting design, although maybe that was just a bug, I don't know. On veteran difficulty at least, these fights were somewhat insane. There's a mission in the arena questline where we're set against a chimera. After failing it a few times, the monster bugged out, and I ended up winning by sinking literally every bullet the game gave me into its head. Regardless of that, though, the mutants provide a real threat to the player throughout the entire runtime. I found myself keeping a decent, high-capacity shotgun with me at all times, until I got the revolver. I really liked this game's revolver. The artifact system is taking after Call of Pripyat, but more of it. Artifacts are limited to set anomalous zones, repopulating from a list every time the zone has a blowout. The anomalies are a wonderful tool to build elaborate mazes, and there's new, unique landmark anomalies and set location arc anomalies that contain special artifacts with more distinct yet vague effects. Anomalies have been updated into loose categories as well. Reflex-based traps, bursting anomalies that can be temporarily disarmed, and more insidious environmental hazards. There's also gotta be something like 70 artifacts in the game. I don't know exactly. I found around 50 and the achievement to collect them all didn't pop, so there's gotta be a lot. The problem here is that they're all very similar. Most of the artifacts at this point are simple boosts to an elemental defense paired with radiation damage, or ones that give you a reduction to radiation damage. With the introduction of the arc artifacts, it seemed apparent that they wanted more esoteric effects, and I would have liked to see more of that in the general artifact pool. Give me a hunk of living plastic that makes me immune to buckshot but gives me tinnitus. I don't know. The sky's the limit here, and it seems confining to make everything a flat percentage boost. Well, I guess I'm talking about the things I disliked now. Things really took a turn around the 30-hour mark. The first half of the game was smooth, until I triggered the storyline events that result in the destruction of a town. Everything kind of went to hell at that point. Quests failed to load, doors became permanently locked, giving me flashbacks to the early days of Shadows of Chernobyl, and the crashing. I'm used to playing a lot of modded games. Most of my formative gaming years were spent in Mount and Blade mods or Warcraft 3 custom games, so I do have a high tolerance for crashing to desktop. But this got bad. I'm talking crashes every 10 minutes. Every game in the S.T.A.L.K.E.R franchise has this weird ramshackle feeling. The longer you play in a save, the more the game seems to be shaking apart around you, until the very end where it seems like everything might just collapse. Heart of Chernobyl has that same feeling, but with a 90-hour runtime, it sets in way before the ending. And the biggest problem, the game becomes tedious. Fast travel has been cut down from COP. There are guides in towns who can zip you across the map to the other main towns, but you'll no longer come across random squads that can take you home for a few bucks. This system might have worked okay in the original trilogy, which had a relatively smaller map. But here, in an open world, and especially an open world of this size, it just feels like they haven't learned any cautionary lessons from the last dozen years of game design. Large open worlds almost always become tedious if you need to crisscross them multiple times without any major changes to the world or without any movement boosting factors. Or fast travel that allows you to skip over the parts you've already explored. It's fun in the beginning when you're ignoring the story and just sort of spiderwebbing around the map. But as I progressed through the story, the missions increasingly became simple travel to point A, dialogue, go to point B quests. Almost always directing me to somewhere around a 15-minute walk from the nearest settlement. So it became a series of 5-minute sprints to the guide, a brief load, and then more running. By this point I was flush with gear and cash, and most of the locations were not distinct enough for me to immediately recall if I had already carefully looted them, so I largely ignored them unless they seemed particularly unusual. The game felt like it was falling apart increasingly, and half the time I was crashing on my way to the destination. It became a weird, purgatorial experience. I just wanted it to be over so I could write this stinking review. I wasn't having fun, and if I wasn't making this video, I probably would have dropped the game at that point and waited a few months to try again. I don't know exactly what it is about this game, but for some reason the movement feels like crouching during a sprint should make you slide. I don't even know why I mention this, it's just an impression I had. There's a few odd impressions I got in the back half of the game. Like that this feels like a technically ambitious mod for Far Cry 3. And the endgame combat, well, after a certain point, almost all of the enemies you face will be wearing exoskeleton armor. Maybe it's just the difficulty setting I chose, but it made that armor feel cheap and common. Plus, my guns were burning through durability in individual firefights. It ends up devolving into sneaking and lining up silenced headshots against enemies that are too dumb to respond. Again, like a Far Cry game. Alright, here's the other big problem I have. They got rid of the night vision. Ruining your eyes squinting through that green filter is such an integral part of the original experience. I might sound like I'm joking, but I mean this genuinely. Having to choose between barely functional night vision, pitch blackness, and the flashlight was a core component of the Stalker experience to me. A little bit of friction in the game mechanics is really what makes horror games work. Upgrading to the decent night vision is always the cathartic moment in the original trilogy where it feels like you've achieved mastery over the world, where you can truly fight back against whatever the zone throws at you. And it feels like a misstep to have taken that out. I did actually like the Spark faction's questline. It's a bit of a reversal of the pop culture version of the allegory of the cave. If all your senses are tricked into seeing the world as a paradise, does it really matter that it isn't? Or are you perhaps better off achieving that imaginary freedom? It's an interesting thought experiment and kind of echoes one of my favorite movies, Brazil. But I'm running the risk of major spoilers here, so I'll just leave it at that. Well, thanks for making it this far. This is a hard game to evaluate as it currently exists. So much of it felt like a direct improvement on the original trilogy. I was absolutely spellbound by the early game, and at one point I remember distinctly thinking it might be one of my favorite games I've ever played. And then so much of it left me undeniably frustrated, wishing it was over already. This was an experience of soaring highs and shattering lows. On the trusty pain scale, I'd rate it, on average, I want to say it's moderately painful. Or maybe excruciatingly painful, or painless, or I don't know. I'm not being very hopeful here. I don't want to rate it very low because I want to replay it, even now, fresh off the hurt. It's got the bones of an all-time great, but there's just a lot of little issues at present. If you're the kind of person who doesn't feel the need to compulsively complete every game you play, check this one out. If you just play this until you get bored, you'll have a hell of a time. The problem for me came when I tried to push past that point. Oh well, that's life in the big city. And that's all for my 30th review. Sorry it was a little indecisive, but I hope I got my points across. It took a lot longer than I expected due to the holidays and hunting season and everything. I'll probably grab a shorter game next. I do love shorter games. Thanks for tuning in, and as always, See you.
Are you suggesting we skip protocol and go full stalker on this? It could work.